Iran launch a massive missile barrage, drone barrage at Israel. We've seen images of buildings destroyed, Israeli officials, Israelis themselves talking about never experiencing this kind of damage before. And the United States has been asked and begged, really, to jump in. Brian, how about we begin with the scale of this? What happened during this phase of Operation True Promise 3? What have you been seeing, and how significant is this? There are images of hypersonic missiles going at their 3,800, whatever it is, miles per hour speed, crashing into Israel. It's astounding in many ways, but what do you see the significance of this being?
Well, it is definitely a much larger scale operation than the first two retaliations Iran carried out, again, after unprovoked U.S.-aided and abetted Israeli strikes, first on Iran's consulate in Syria and then on Iran itself after Iran's first retaliation. So this is a much larger scale operation. It has now spanned several days. Israel continues to carry out operations against Iran. And again, as we talked about previously, Iran is using ballistic missiles fired from Iran. Israel needs to mobilize large coordinated sorties with warplanes, electronic warfare. They need to contend with air defenses. They're flying over the airspace of other nations, long missions to carry out these strikes against Iranian targets. Even the Western media is doubting the accuracy and the efficacy of these strikes, although I do not doubt that they are doing serious damage to Iran as well. Now, the question that we asked before and that we need to continue asking and waiting for the answer is, who's going to sustain this type of military operation longer, and what are the goals of each party to this conflict? Now, you just talked about Israel asking the United States to join the conflict. This is a U.S. war being waged through Israel. The United States is already involved. They are already directly involved, and they are the ones looking for a pretext to more openly involve themselves and most likely carry out strikes directly themselves. They want, again, this was all designed, the negotiations, everything was designed to make it out as if Israel provoked this and the U.S. reluctantly was dragged into it, when this was always the plan. This was a U.S. plan. Israel's being used as an extension of U.S. foreign policy and hostility towards Iran. The goal of the United States and its Israeli proxies is to destroy the Iranian nation state and to topple the Iranian government. Iran's goal is to survive. A lot of people have very high hopes that Iran is going to somehow wipe Israel off the map with their missiles. I want to remind people that Russia has fired thousands and thousands of missiles and drones into Ukraine. Ukraine is still there. Their economy has been completely destroyed. Ukraine is still there because it's being propped up by the US and all of its other proxies in Europe. Israel is not going to be wiped out by missile strikes. Even if the economy is crippled, damaged, even completely destroyed, it will be propped up like all of America's other proxies. And people will say, Brian, Israel is smaller than Ukraine, so it's not a good analogy. I would point their attention to Gaza, which is much smaller than Israel itself. It's been bombed and shelled and invaded and bulldozed for years and years and years, and it's still there. So this is a realistic limit to Iran, its military capabilities. It is seeking to survive. It is seeking to raise the cost for both Israel and the U.S. to continue this conflict. That is their hope.
What's so astounding about this, Brian, is that we have Iran launching what is just the biggest, maybe ever, attack that Israel has ever faced. It's, of course, all in retaliation. And it doesn't seem, of course, Iran's goal is not to eradicate Israel. That's been the propaganda talking point for so long, to justify aggression toward Iran. But it seems like the aim of this is to get Israel to stop doing what it's doing, which is targeting civilians, and of course trying to bring the United States into the war in a bigger way. Yes, I agree with you. The United States is involved. We know that before this, before the initial surprise attack that Israel launched, the United States had sent missiles to Israel, and of course has been providing all of the intelligence, all of the support that it needs to do such a thing, and of course the cover. But now I wanted to ask you, Brian, what did you notice about this latest phase of Operation True Promise 3 with regard to the damage that it's done to Israel? Because I've been hearing things like in Bat Yam that there are, of course, Israel undercounts so many things always with regard to any data relating to its participation in acts of aggression and what it sustains because of them, the backlash, the fight back, the response because of them. But here we're seeing and we're hearing reports of 100+ people being hurt, quote unquote, 30+ missing, several dead. These are numbers in a single day in a single area that we've never really heard coming out of Israel. So talk about, you said that the strikes, it's hard to know how long Iran can go, how long Israel can go with this. What about the damage done so far? How does this affect the Israeli side, the United States side as it moves forward?
It is unprecedented for Israel. I mean, we have not seen this since the turn of the 21st century, and this is Israel now suffering what it has been dealing out to so many other nations. Israel itself is admitting Iran is targeting military targets primarily, and it's the Israeli government who put those military installations inside heavily populated areas. So that's not Iran's fault. That is the Israeli government's fault for putting their military headquarters right in the middle of Tel Aviv. They're also striking at economic targets like oil refineries, but this is in response to Israel striking Iran's oil refineries, airports, military airports especially, and it is going to affect the tempo of these Israeli sorties being carried out against Iran. But we have to remember, it's not Israel fighting Iran. It's the United States fighting Iran through Israel. The United States has huge amounts of assets outside of Israel that cannot be touched right now by Iran, but defined by the scope Iran itself defined for this operation. So it can replace these aircraft. It can replace any lost munitions, and the air defense capabilities in Israel are being augmented by the U.S. Navy and U.S. Land-based air and missile defense systems scattered all across the region. So we have to keep all of that in consideration. It already is a multi-front war being waged against Iran, with Israel being placed out in front on purpose to take responsibility and absorb retaliation, as, again, these policy papers have laid out well over a decade ago.
Yeah, well, it's no doubt that the United States has to support Israel now, even more so perhaps. And the discussions are inside now of Washington, with Israel coming to essentially on their knees for more, because at this point, Brian, what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is that Israel on its own, without additional air defenses, won't be able to sustain any kind of significant defense from Iran's whatever it has remaining in its stockpiles of missiles. I'm hearing that they've only been using the older types, and now they're just testing out the newer models that they have, the hypersonic missiles, and that essentially the reason why Israel is saying the United States, please get more involved, is because if they don't have American air cover, if they don't have the United States getting more directly involved, Israel will be exhausted in terms of their air defenses before Iran is exhausted, which is bad news for, when we talk about the U.S. and Israeli goal here. If the United States is at the lead, well, you're looking at one of the most embarrassing in generations, if not ever, for the United States' most important outpost in the world, its most important so-called ally in the world, being embarrassed to this degree. Have you seen these reports? What do you make of this, given that the reason why Iran is doing this is because it's defending itself? It is striking at Israel, mostly military targets, but given that so much civilian blood has been taken in Iran already, I think there's definitely over 100 at this point. In some of these single strikes, Israel has taken out 20 children alone. I mean, now Iran has the right to hit anything because it's an all-out war, and Israel has already violated international law. So usually when Israel does this with the U.S.'s help, there isn't the other side having the capabilities to strike back in any significant way. It seems like this is different.
Yes, well, again, going back to the policy papers from well over a decade ago, the 2009 Which Path to Persia document put out by the Brookings Institution, they said in that paper many times, Israel does not have the capability to strike at and destroy even just Iran's nuclear program. And so the plan always was to have Israel kick it off and the U.S. wade in after, and wade in as a reluctant participant, even though the U.S. engineered everything from A to Z and is fighting the conflict through Israel, which is exactly what the U.S. has been doing in Ukraine versus Russia. And it's what they are setting up to fight a proxy war with China through the island province of Taiwan or the Philippines, or perhaps even South Korea and Japan. So that is the pattern. That is the pattern. And this is narrative building. This is perception management. The illusion that Israel is asking the U.S. for help and the U.S. is considering it, when the U.S. always knew that this was to precipitate their direct involvement eventually, but they need to maneuver in on their terms. And in a way, they're seeing how things are playing out, and they're calculating what they need to do when they do intervene. So that's what is going on here. And again, the goal here is regime change. It is to cripple and destroy Iran as a nation state. And so that's what Israel is trying to do right now on its own, according to the narrative. And then that is what the U.S. will be openly doing once it more openly joins the conflict. I don't think that the U.S. actually cares what happens to Israel. I've said this for many years. I said it is just a proxy. It is just like Ukraine. They will fight the Iranians to the last Israelis. If they have to pick between their primacy over the planet and Israel, they will pick to preserve their primacy over the planet at the expense of Israel, even at the expense of... I've said this many, many times. Now we're watching it play out. The other danger that I want to warn people about is the nuclear weapons Israel is thought to have in large quantities, and the very likelihood that they will use them. And again, the U.S. is right now keeping its distance in the eye of the public. And if Israel were to use nuclear weapons, the U.S. could distance itself from that, even though, again, they engineered and provoked this entire conflict. So we have to watch out for all of that. Oh, one more option people need to really watch out for: a false flag carried out by the United States. They could even if they could even claim that it was Israel carrying it out, to even put another degree of separation between them and all of this, and cite that as a pretext to wade into the conflict. So there's all of these things, all of these tricks we've seen the U.S. use before, that are you can see them shaping the narrative, managing public perception, getting ready to escalate this even further.
The timing of this is very interesting, because already how I see it is that if this were to stop tomorrow for some reason, if Israel, Iran, whoever, the United States, I'm like, this is just not the timing. Already Israel and the United States has suffered a huge, when you say perception management, the perception is looking really bad, because on the one hand, you have Israel, of course, doing what it does with U.S. help, killing civilians, thumping its chest, doing always what it does, very inhumane, barbaric stuff. But then you have Iran hitting mostly military targets, and now the imagery is out there of Haifa, of Tel Aviv, of the hypersonic missile going, at this astounding rate and smashing into Israel, people all over the region celebrating. the missiles going over their heads in Lebanon and other areas. We have Yemen. We've heard reports, especially in media in Iran and media in Lebanon, saying that Yemen is involved in assisting and in aiding Iran, which is no surprise since Yemen has been engaged with Israel for I don't know how many, over a year and a half, nearly the entire 20 months of the horrific massacres and genocide in Gaza. So the perception seems to already be terrible, which makes me think that, yes, the United States has been supporting Israel from the very get-go, and there is this agenda. The timing of this seems really bad for the United States, given that, as you said, there is a real nuclear question here. And now if Israel uses its nuclear weapons, given what we've seen now with Iran, Iran seems to have really good intelligence about where everything is in Israel. That's why they're targeting what they're targeting. That's why central Israel is in such is getting the brunt of these attacks, because they know this is where a lot of Israel's a lot of Israel's military arsenal is. But now, if Israel is forced, with the U.S.'s help, to pursue the nuclear option, well, Iran isn't exhausted right now. They obviously have capabilities left as we speak now. That's a risk. And if the United States gets more involved, if they start flying their bombers overhead and bombing Iran, what happens for the United States when, and I've been talking to people about this around me and my family, I've been saying, what happens when we already have F-35 jets likely shot down? Some are saying 3, some are saying 2. Regardless of the official number, if any get shot down, if any F-18 or any bomber from the United States is shot down in a conflict with Iran, it would be historic and unprecedented. I don't think Israel can't handle any hit against it. We've seen this with October 7th. It went completely berserk. When it feels that it is being so-called attacked, it goes unhinged, and we've seen that over 20 months. With the United States, this is I think the big concern is that the United States gets involved with Iran, takes any damage from Iran. Well, then what happens then? What happens then? Because the United States is a different animal. It is the empire. It is the hegemon. And its nuclear capabilities are far, far outweigh Israel's. It's a really dangerous situation. So, Brian, your comment, because I think Iran is trying to avoid this, of course. Iran doesn't want to see this. Iran is defending itself. But the United States here, by flirting with the idea of a direct intervention with Iran, is also flirting with nuclear war, because their conventional means are likely going to see some damage. I don't know how much. I don't know how much Iran would be able to do to the U.S., but if they're going to fly overhead in Iranian airspace, I can't imagine that Iran won't be targeting them and maybe getting a hit.
We're in uncharted territory right now, and so it's very hard to say what will happen. We've talked very, very often over the last couple of years about how the time is the window of opportunity is closing for the United States to reassert hegemony over the planet, and it is rushing, and it is making very bad, rushed decisions. I think this attack on Iran was a rushed decision. They see their proxy war against Russia and Ukraine going badly. They see China rising at an exponential rate. They have openly said they need to pause the conflict in Ukraine and pivot to China because they can't fight both at the same time. They said this in public. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth laid this out many times. Almost every time he gets in front of a podium, he lays this out. And we knew that they were going to stop at Iran along the way during this pivot from Ukraine to confront China in the Asia-Pacific region. So we're in uncharted territory. We always have said that when the U.S. becomes more desperate, they become more dangerous. They have a proxy Israel with nuclear weapons that they might explore the possibility of using. And I just don't know what happens after that. Every nation on earth is going to have to ask themselves and reconsider the strategy they're using right now to manage the decline of U.S. hegemony worldwide. They're going to have to really reconsider it, because this is out of control, and it becomes a danger to absolutely every human being on Earth. Now, the other problem is the mask has slipped off. As we warned, President Trump was never going to change anything. Before he stepped foot in office, he surrounded himself with neocons who have dreamed of war with Iran their entire political career. And so, surprise, now he's leading this war against Iran, fought through Israel, and we anticipate the U.S. will be involved directly. Many Trump supporters are disillusioned and angry, disappointed, and they don't support him anymore. But we all know, Danny, that there's a segment of the population that still supports President Donald Trump, who love the idea of a war with Iran, hate Iran, and they're driven by jingoistic, racist, bigoted worldviews, and also a supremacist worldview. And so there's a percentage of the American public who will go along with this. And if they see a U.S. warship go to the bottom of the Persian Gulf, or a U.S. military base illegally scattered all across the Middle East, on the other side of the planet from where they actually should be, get struck, large casualties, these people are going to demand more, not less war. And it's really hard to see how this can go well. And the U.S. is an expert at cornering its own population, or the population of one of its proxies, cornering them between a stone wall and their supposed enemies, and forcing them to fight their way through. And so this is the position they're placing Israel, Ukraine, their proxies everywhere, deliberately, and they will most likely try to do this to the American public as well.
The U.S. assets, which Iran has said that are fair game should the United States do what we've been talking about, which is get even more directly involved, begin to use their destroyers and their aircraft carriers to launch strikes via, over air or at sea. And then we have the situation where Iran, of course, has already, just in the last several days, struck a deep blow, not only to Israel's invincibility narrative that it promotes for itself, but the United States, of course, Israel, they didn't learn this from nowhere. The United States has, I know you and Angelo, and we've talked about this on your program and on my program, American exceptionalism. This is one of the biggest blows to American. I mean, we're talking about the United States' number one, whether we want to call it an ally, quote unquote, a military outpost, quote unquote, a proxy. Regardless of the name, Israel is of such strategic, military, political, all across the board importance to the U.S. empire. To see this happening in real time, everyone, just like the genocide in Gaza has been real time streamed, this is going viral everywhere, all around the world, especially in the collective West. And for this to happen means that, exactly as you said, Brian, there will be forces, of course, inside of the U.S.'s ruling circle who are, of course, are infuriated right now because they have been dealt a blow. You see it in the West. You see it all over the United States mainstream media. The way that they grovel over Israel's supposed losses, and then the way that, especially a lot of media, Fox News, whatever, how they then say, no, we've got to enter this war. We've got to go harder and harder on Iran. This is almost an invitation for the disaster that you speak of. This is the unhinged, out of control character of the U.S. empire born about because the United States doesn't have the ability to wield anything other than the most destructive power to try to keep and maintain what it has. It is seeing that the writing is on the wall for, even with Iran, which is why I think this is desperate. I think Israel was also desperate. I think they both had simultaneous, desperate issues, a crisis, so to speak, that was emerging, where I think they both were in agreement. And of course, the United States A lot of people disagree with me on this. I believe the United States is the head of the Israeli snake. I don't think the Israeli snake is the head of the U.S. That's ridiculous to even consider, in my opinion, just given that the size of Israel, the money, everyone says the lobby, all of this, but let's be real. That is allowed to happen. The United States could end Ukraine tomorrow. It could, if it pulled out its military aid tomorrow to Israel, it would be all over. So I think the ultimate calculation here was, and I think it was a mistake. I mean, I think to flirt with nuclear disaster in the first 6 months of a completely unstable administration was not intentional. I do think the agenda, as you said, Brian, I agree. The agenda, that's a long-standing one that is not dependent on U.S. administrations, that is not dependent on who's in the White House. At the same time, there seems to be a hugely and very costly accelerationist bent that is being acted upon by the foreign policy establishment that is now seeing what I think is a hugely dangerous moment where we have, on the one hand, Iran being cornered and needing to respond in a very significant way, in doing so, and likely will continue to do so if this doesn't stop. The United States, and of course its Israeli, rabid attack dog, also now being cornered, not in the interest of humanity, but the antithesis of it. They're feeling cornered because they have seen their superiority wane, and they have been responded to in a way that they can't tolerate, which means who knows what the response will be from here. Who we can't really predict, but what we can predict is that the United States will seriously consider trying to wipe Iran off the face of the earth and send it back to the Stone Age. And that means huge consequences for the region, whether they succeed or not. I actually don't know if the United States can succeed in that. It would be a huge disaster, but the aim is there. And we now, I think, if we look at it from maybe a silver lining perspective, what Iran has done here by defending itself successfully is it has pushed the United States to show the world, and especially the United States, people of the United States, that it will do and it will think about and maybe pursue the most catastrophic option on the table, nuclear war, because of this declining empire. And the other part of the silver lining is exactly as you said. How does the multipolar world navigate this? Because eventually, and we are seeing this now with Iran, you can't keep your gloves on. You can't just sit around and allow yourself to be punched and punched and punched. Eventually, the United States, it can't tolerate a sovereign Russia. It can't tolerate a sovereign China. It can't tolerate a sovereign Iran. Eventually, the United States will punch, and you will be compelled punch really hard, and you will be compelled to punch really hard back. And that's the reality that the multipolar world is going to face. We don't like it. We don't want it. I don't want to see a catastrophic war, but it seems like that's the direction.
A lot of good points, Danny. And again, this notion that Israel controls the United States. If this were true, the United States would have initiated the attack on Iran. They would have taken full responsibility for it, and they would have absorbed all retaliation from it. It would be Americans catching ballistic missiles morning, noon, and night for several days now, not Israel. What you see happening in Israel is exactly what is now happening in Ukraine, and that is what happens to proxies of U.S. empire. We're looking at the hallmarks of an empire in terminal decline. The Roman Empire had a sense of invulnerability, and the world feared the Roman Empire because it seemed invulnerable. But when those first few adversaries began fighting back and succeeding, that veneer of invulnerability fell away. And suddenly nobody anywhere in the world was afraid of the Roman Empire anymore. Everybody started defending themselves rather than capitulating to them, and that was the beginning of the end. And of course, there were many other factors internally, externally, that brought the Roman Empire down. And that is exactly what we see happening with the United States. This isn't the first time U.S. military invincibility has been exposed. They just tucked tail and ran from Ansar Allah in Yemen. They lost aircraft to an armed group that doesn't even have an air force. They also have Ukrainians burning to death in M1 Abrams tanks, American-made main battle tanks in Ukraine. Their M777 howitzers. Their entire military-industrial base has been exposed as insufficient compared to Russia, that the U.S. and Europe joke about as being a gas station with nuclear weapons. And we haven't even talked about the rise of China, the shipbuilding capacity of China. Just one of their many, many shipyards, you could fit all of America's shipyards into the corner of. And the sense of invincibility is falling apart. And this was one of its most effective tools in managing the world. It is a bully who rules through fear. And once that fear is gone, you have a very difficult time ruling. Then you're forced to use military power. But what if your military power actually isn't as powerful as you have tried to convince people? So this is the situation they have put themselves in because, like you say, Danny, they can't see a way to interact with the world otherwise. And what they will do is increasingly horrific things to try to reassert fear. And we have to ask ourselves, with what tools? And you see the list of tools narrowing. And one of the things at the top of the list will be their extensive nuclear arsenal. And again, because Israel has nuclear weapons and is a proxy of the U.S., and the U.S. Would love to shift responsibility onto Israel, this is a way they could terrify the world back into line. So we have to be very careful. And one of the last things I'll say and end on is we have to be very careful about allowing our biases to enable overestimating what we think Iran or Russia or China can do, and underestimating what Israel, Ukraine, and of course the US, which is using both as proxies, can do. We have to be very careful about that, not allow our biases to cloud our ability to see what is actually happening, and also exercise a degree of patience. This is an armed ongoing conflict. Things are very fluid. It's not going to be clear. There's deliberate misinformation, people simply making mistakes. So we have to be very, very careful as we wade through all of this.